spool up and strap in. You're watching Simblets. Today, we're not just talking about what virtual reality might become. We're revealing what it was. I'm going to take you on a personal and painfully glorious trip down memory lane to young me in VR around 12 years ago. This is all the way back when P3D was really just starting to take off. I think we're at P3D version 2, but most people were still on the old FSX. And as far as I'm aware, the first person to really pioneer VR in Flight Simulator was a person called Daniel Church, but better known as Fly Inside. Just like Fly Inside, VR has come tremendously far, especially in the flight simulator realm. So without further ado, let's begin at the start. Let me take you down a very cringe and painful time in my life, but this is when Fly Inside just started their Kickstarter campaign. I managed to get early access to take a look at it and give it a test. So let's get straight into the cringe and take a look at young me.
Hey guys, what's up? Today I'm going to be showing you a program called Fly Inside. It's by Daniel Church, I think you say his name.
Yep, that's me. Somewhere between 10 and 12 years ago. Quite a lot has changed since then, including me. But anyway, let's keep watching.
And it's a program for the Oculus Rift DK2. So right now I'm currently on VetSim. I'm at Sydney and I'm flying over to Yankee Sierra November Whiskey. I'm going to have to peek through the roof, grab the UI and drag it down. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this kind of content. I mainly do games, audio and Oculus type things.
I was obviously a lot younger back then, and things have come a long way. For some of you, this will obviously take you way back to when Flight Simulator looked like this. But to others that are new to Flight Simulator since the release of 2020 and 2024, this was the pinnacle of flight simulation. It's sad, but this was considered the cutting edge and high quality of flight sim. So as you can see, things were completely different back then. This was on the Oculus Rift DK2, which at the time was the absolute top-end VR headset available, at least in the consumer market. And because the DK2 was a development kit for people to make games with, it wasn't a consumer product. So firmware, drivers, things like that were not optimized for gaming whatsoever. It was lucky to even hit around 40 FPS back then, which was considered good in VR. You'd still get quite a bit motion sick. You couldn't read any dials, couldn't see headings, couldn't see any of that. You just get the 3D perspective of kind of flying the aircraft in a very pixelated state. So with all that cringe out of the way, let's take a look at Flight Simulator 2024 in VR. It is just insane and wild that I can just put on my headset, push a couple of buttons, and I get this experience. It is absolutely just wild. So let's jump ahead as times have advanced. No longer is a top-end simulator for VR, FSX or P3D. It's now Flight Sim 2024. And along with that is gone my old beloved DK2. Instead, it's been replaced by the Meta Quest 3. Although not the best VR headset in the world for PC gaming, it is absolutely centuries ahead of the DK2. So let's finish this stunning takeoff out of Queenstown before I give you a full deep dive on VR. So back when I was using Fly Inside in FSX and P3D, there wasn't any technology to help improve the frame rates for VR. It was still when VR was only being adopted. It wasn't even something that was considered or thought possible in the flight simulator world. With that came a lot of challenges, meaning you didn't have DLSS to help improve frame rates. There was no asynchronous time warp. There wasn't even a way to adjust the refresh rate and frame rate. But that all changed in 2020 and 2024, especially after Sim Update 2. Foveated rendering was brought in, which was a game changer for VR. But along with that, we now have NVIDIA DLSS, NVIDIA frame generation, FSR, asynchronous time warp, so many other technologies to help us achieve those frame rates. So you're not getting as motion sick, and VR can keep evolving. We can up the resolution. And we're now at a point where VR is now considered mainstream, similar to high-end consoles. It's no longer a development kit or anything like that. It's something that you can buy off the shelf at a store. Now, I'd say that VR is still far from perfect in flight sim. Personally, I'd love to see a feature that was in Fly Inside all the way back in FSX days that still isn't in 2024 natively, which is the ability to bring in Windows applications. Now, obviously this can be done with a bit of messing around with some things like Open Kneeboard. But back in the day, it was literally simple as a couple of clicks, and suddenly you had any window you wanted that you had on your computer in VR that you could move around. I'd also love the ability for Navigraph to make kind of like physical paper charts, or even a physical iPad/tablet that were in a simulator, if you know what I mean. Now obviously in 2024, we do have the in-game tablet, but in my opinion, it just looks like a window. I want something that is like a 3D object tablet, something to make it feel more real. But other than that, out of the box, 2024 gives an unreal experience in VR. Especially thinking back to the days where I did VR in FSX, I couldn't imagine that ever would I be at this level of detail with this frame rate, or even that flight sim could look like this out of the box. Now default airports look closer to something what developers would make for FSX. To this day, I still have a very vivid memory from back in the days of FSX. One time I was doing VR in VATSIM, just doing a hop from Melbourne to Canberra. I was given vectors to turn left heading 275 or something like that. But because the resolution is so low and you couldn't read anything, I just could not get the heading. So I had to manually turn and keep asking the controller until I was lined up with that heading. And from that point, I realized it wasn't something that I could do in VATSIM. It wasn't at the point where I could really use it for Flight Simulator. It was a cool experience to kind of fly around in a glider and see some scenery, but other than that, you really couldn't use it. So I'd take off, and once I get to cruise, I'd then put on my headset and just enjoy the scenery. As soon as I got instructions or was given descent clearance, I'd have to take off the headset and fly from my computer screen. However, now in 2024, I very often do full complete flights gate to gate in VR. Although the Quest 3 has a decent resolution, it's still hard to read some numbers. It's not ideal or perfect, but with some of the new technologies, you're able to zoom in close with just the click of a mouse to really see what you're looking at to make it possible. Now I do gate-to-gate flights in VATSIM in VR, and there's no problem. However, I'm sure as many of you know, there are far better headsets than the Quest 3. I absolutely highly recommend you go check out the VR Flight Sim guy on YouTube. He has an incredible channel where he covers so much about VR and flight sim, especially about pushing it to the limits and getting the most out of your headset and flight sim. And from watching his channel, the thing I learned is the Quest 3, while it's good for flight sim, it's not the top end or best to get out of flight sim. So personally, I'd love to upgrade one day to the Pimax Crystal. I think that's what's considered the top end for flight simulation, or any simulator really, for desktop experiences. And just a side note, it's also kind of hard to compare Flight Simulator VR back in the day to current, because there was a large pause in development in flight simulation. What I mean exactly is in terms of Microsoft. So the development of FSX was really completed around October 23, 2007, which was the release of FSX Acceleration. Acceleration was basically a DLC pack that gave a couple of new aircraft and mainly a service pack. And back in the day, that service pack was essential to using any third-party developer aircraft really. It's basically a sim update. But between that service pack release and 2020 was 13 years. Now obviously in that 13 years it wasn't completely dead. We had the rise of P3D, X-Plane, a couple of other smaller simulators. But for Microsoft itself, it took a 13-year hiatus, which meant VR for Flight Simulator kind of took a back burner. While P3D also implemented VR, it was still in a very basic kind of form, similar to Flying Sight. But again, it was limited because it was still running on the old ESP engine, something that FSX ran on, and P3D. So it was hard to kind of advance when you were limited by the game itself. With that said though, the new engine that Flight Simulator now runs on obviously has a lot more potential, and we're still finding out that potential as Microsoft continues to update 2024 and 2020. And as I said, we've already seen some huge leaps and bounds in VR technology, especially in flight sim, like foveated rendering. So I'm excited to see what Microsoft is going to implement to make VR even better. But with all that said, I can't thank you enough for watching. Be sure to give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments what you thought. And of course, if you want to support me, hit that subscribe button so you can see more of my content. But until next time, I'll catch you then.